Alright, this lesson's on the King's Indian. Here's the thing about the King's Indian is black. If you don't play it correctly, it's going to be terrible. So for my students, you guys need to really do better in the King's Indian. Learn not just the first 5 moves, but the first 10 to 15 moves for sure. So here we go. D4, knight to F6, C4, G6, knight C3, bishop G7, pawn to E4. You got to play D6 there. Don't make that silly mistake. Now, knight to F3, castles, bishop to E2, pawn to E5. This is an incredibly critical move. If you don't play this move in the King's Indian or C5, but I would recommend E5, okay? If you don't play this move, you will lose because white will just push you off the board. So you play this move. Now, white can do one of 2 things. Oftentimes, white players who like to play queen's pawn like to close the position. So they might play D5 immediately. Or they might castle, which I believe is the main move. Then knight to C6, now pawn to D5, and then you bring your knight to E7. So here's this, a very clear situation. After bishop to E3, what do we do now? And this is the last important, critical phase of the opening, in which if you don't play this sequence, you lose too. You got to play knight to D7. Okay? Now at this point, depending on what white does, they could do a couple of things. They could play pawn to B4. They could play rook to C1. They could play knight to E1, actually, which the purpose of that is after F5, alright, which they should know, a good player will know that after knight to D7, you're going to play knight to pawn to F5. They play here, and now they reinforce with pawn to F3. If they don't do that, if they do something like, for example, if they do this B4 move, you play F5. If they take you, you don't take back with the rook or the knight. No, you take back with the pawn. Then they make a move like this. Then you push the pawn eventually like this. Maybe not here exactly, but the idea with the King's Indian is you have to do some moves to try to gain the center, and then your bishop then becomes on the diagonal ready to fight. So going back to it here, if they play pawn takes, well here, let's say that we were going to continue this position after F3. Once again, if they play pawn takes, you play pawn takes. If they play F3, you play this move G5. Or sorry, F4, excuse me. And now you start bringing your kingside pawns, and you do a pawn storm with your own kingside pieces. Now this is why kids really have trouble with this, is because this is foreign to them. They're not doing this stuff a lot, but this is what's needed in order to play the King's Indian. It's not for somebody who's a passive player. It's for an aggressive player who likes to push and have action. This is the way that you're trying to play it. So let's just do a couple more moves. Let's say G5. Let's say now they play they're here. Now we play a move like this. They play here. We play our knight back like this. The knight eventually goes back to this square. Maybe they come over here. Well, actually, technically speaking, the queen comes. Typically the knight comes over here. Let's say the knight goes, the queen goes here. Then you start pushing this pawn here. They start trying to do stuff like this. You bring your queen over. Now you're preparing for a queenside attack. They try to open you up. And in the King's Indian, a lot of times you're doing some sacrifice type stuff. So, you know, let's say, for example, well, here we can play knight takes pawn, so that's pretty good. Let's see what could happen here. Yeah, probably play knight takes pawn here. But the idea is you're going to try to do a pawn storm here on this king. Let me put this queen back instead. Let me make it a little bit more fun. Put the queen. I'm going to insert it over here. So we do something like this. Now we go here like this. They take us. We push the pawn. Takes. And now we see a situation where the king's imprisoned with this pawn from our own king side. And let's say, I don't know, let's say, for example, we play a move like this. And then we start doing this type of stuff. I'm just playing crazy moves here. There's some games that we can go over that we need to go over later on. But I want to give you the general. I'm just playing moves here to, like, this is all about feel. The King's Indian is, thematic type stuff. So, you open up the king, you create an attack, you get this pressure, you get this king side. And what happens is if you don't checkmate white on the king side, you often lose on the queen side. As you can see here, black's getting dominated on the queen side. The point being, though, with this is that it's completely away from our own king. That's why we're able to actually get this pawn storm going. So, anyways, that's just a brief synopsis about the King's Indian. There's a lot of variations that are forced and lines that we need to work through. You need one thing that's problem with D4 at a beginning stage too is oftentimes your opponents aren't really playing these moves deep. It's not till you get to, let's say, 15, 1600, 1800, definitely the guys are banging out the moves really fast. So anyways, this is Coach John, and this is the King's Indian, and I'll talk to you later.